It started with something small, barely noticeable at first. A trash can mysteriously tipped over. A letter slipped under the door unsigned. A fine that seemed impossible. But before long, what should have been a peaceful home turned into a battlefield ruled by neighbors, with too much power and far too much time. Every day brought a new rule, a new threat, a new way to remind me that I wasn't welcome in my own home. And when I finally fought back, I uncovered a secret so shocking it shook the entire neighborhood. How far would they go to control one family? And what happens when the wrong person finally says enough? Life in the neighborhood was supposed to be simple, a quiet cul-de-sac lined with identical houses, trimmed hedges, and perfectly painted mailboxes. For the Thompsons, it felt like a fresh start. After years of apartment living, they'd finally found a home with a yard big enough for their kids to play in and a porch where they could sip coffee every morning. The neighbors all waved politely, and the HOA brochure promised a tight-knit, welcoming community. On the surface, it looked like paradise. At first, everything was picture perfect. The kids rode bikes up and down the street. Summer evenings were filled with the smell of barbecues and freshly cut grass. The family poured their energy into turning the house into a home, planting flowers, and decorating the porch with hanging baskets. They followed every rule, paid every fee, and never thought twice about living under HOA management. After all, the association claimed to keep the neighborhood orderly and safe. But behind those neatly trimmed lawns and cheerful smiles was something no brochure could warn them about, a quiet tension that simmered beneath the surface. Subtle glances when they painted their shutters, a slightly darker shade than the neighbors. A note slipped into their mailbox, reminding them that trash cans must be hidden from view at all times. Little things easy to ignore at first. Still, there was something unnerving about the way certain board members always seemed to be watching, like hawks circling overhead. And soon, what started as friendly reminders would turn into constant warnings, threats, and fines. The Thompsons didn't know it yet, but they were about to become the HOA's favorite target, and that perfect little community would never feel safe again. At first, the warning seemed harmless. A yellow slip taped to their front door. Trash cans must be stored out of sight by 7 p.m. The next day, another. Lawn height exceeds HOA standards. Emily Thompson, usually calm and collected, brushed them off. It's just part of living here, she told her husband, Mark. But by the third notice, things started to feel different. This time, it wasn't a polite reminder. It was a $75 fine. The violation? A flower pot, hand-painted by their daughter, placed at the edge of their driveway. Emily stood in disbelief as she read the letter. Decorations must be approved by the HOA board. A flower pot, that was their crime. At first, they paid the fine, hoping to avoid conflict. But the letters kept coming. A warning about their mailbox, which was allegedly not glossy enough. Another about their backyard fence, which had an unapproved shade of white. They checked the HOA guidelines, 34 pages of dense rules, and found nothing about paint shades or mailbox finishes. Still, the fines kept piling up. Mark decided to attend an HOA meeting, hoping to reason with the board. That's when he met Carol. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, the HOA president, a woman with a fixed smile that never reached her eyes. She greeted Mark warmly, but as he brought up the fines, her expression hardened. Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson. We expect homeowners to maintain our community's standards. When he asked for clarification on those standards, she simply said, they're subject to interpretation. That night, Mark realized something. This wasn't about the rules. It was about control. Soon after, their lives began to feel like surveillance. Emily swore she saw Carol's SUV parked at the end of their street more than once. Engine off, lights dim. Their neighbor, a quiet older man, mentioned seeing someone snapping photos of their house at dawn. The Thompsons' mailbox filled with compliance letters, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. One morning, they found their trash can tipped over, its contents strewn across the street. Mark chalked it up to raccoons until it happened again. And again, always on collection day. Always after they'd carefully stored the bin exactly as instructed. By this point, Mark had had enough. He began documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, copies of every letter. He noticed patterns. The same neighbor always happened to be walking her dog when Emily brought the trash out. Carol's SUV appeared at odd hours, parked just close enough to observe but never long, enough to be suspicious, at least officially. Then came the certified letter. This time it wasn't a fine, it was a threat. Failure to comply with HOA guidelines may result in legal action, including foreclosure. Emily's hands shook as she read it. Foreclosure? Over trash cans and flower pots? Mark's frustration turned into anger. He spent hours poring over HOA bylaws, learning that yes, in some communities, the association could seize your home for unpaid fines. They weren't bluffing. The family's dream home was suddenly a ticking time bomb. The pressure took its toll. Their kids started asking why their playhouse had to be dismantled. Emily stopped planting flowers altogether. Even Mark began second-guessing every little thing he did outside. Was the grass too long? Was the driveway too dirty? Living under that constant scrutiny was like being watched by 1,000 invisible cameras. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, a new rule passed. No holiday decorations without prior approval. The Thompsons had always gone all out for Christmas. That year they kept the lights in boxes, too afraid of another letter. But their silence didn't stop the harassment. A neighbor whispered that Carol was making an example of them. Apparently she'd done it before, targeting homeowners who didn't attend HOA events or vote for her in board elections. Mark realized they weren't just unlucky, they were being singled out. That's when he made a decision. If they were going to fight, they needed proof. Mark installed discreet security cameras around the property. Not flashy ones, just small devices tucked under the eaves and behind plants. He didn't expect much, but within a week, the cameras paid off. At 5:13 a.m. one Tuesday, the footage caught a figure walking up their driveway. Carol. She looked around, grabbed their trash bin and tipped it over. She didn't see the camera above her head recording everything. Mark couldn't believe it. The HOA president herself was vandalizing their property. He showed Emily, who was too shocked to speak. Finally, they had leverage, but Mark didn't act immediately. Instead, he waited, collecting more footage. Over the next few days, the cameras captured her taking photos of their porch, inspecting their mailbox, even peering over their backyard fence. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was stalking them. When Mark finally brought the evidence to the HOA board, he expected outrage. Instead, they dismissed it. "We'll look into it," one member said coldly. No apology, no resolution. It was clear Carol had complete control over the board. That night, Mark realized this wouldn't be solved quietly. If they wanted their freedom back, they'd have to take the fight outside the HOA. Emily started researching legal options. What they found shocked them. Other homeowners across the country had gone through the same nightmare. HOAs wielded terrifying power, often with little oversight. Some had bankrupted families over trivial disputes. Some had even seized homes. And then, almost as if she knew they were fighting back, Carol escalated. They came home one evening to find a massive red notice taped to their front door. Final warning, property in violation. It listed 6 different infractions, from unapproved landscaping to excessive driveway staining. Mark laughed bitterly. Driveway staining? From what, rain? Emily was on the verge of tears. "They're going to take our house." That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork and screenshots, plotting his next move. He wasn't going to let some petty neighborhood tyrant destroy his family's home. And as he stared at the footage of Carol tipping over their trash bin, an idea began to form. Something bold. Something that would finally expose her. The fight was about to get ugly. The night before the HOA's big quarterly meeting, Mark sat hunched over his laptop like a man preparing for battle. Every letter, every fine, every photograph of Carol snooping around their property was neatly organized in a presentation. Emily watched him from across the kitchen table, her hands trembling around a mug of untouched coffee. The red final warning notice was still taped to their fridge, a reminder of everything they stood to lose. "This is it," Mark said finally. "We either shut her down tomorrow, or she wins." Emily nodded, but her eyes were full of fear. They both knew what was at stake. Carol wasn't just some nosy neighbor. She was a woman with the power to ruin them financially, to take their home. But Mark wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry, and anger gave him clarity. The next evening, the HOA meeting was packed. Folding chairs lined the community center, every seat filled with homeowners. Some were there to complain about landscaping fees or parking violations. Others came simply because drama had become entertainment. Everyone knew about the Thompsons by now. Carol had made sure of that. Mark and Emily walked in together, their backs straight, their faces calm despite the pounding in their chests. Carol stood at the front of the room, smiling like a queen addressing her subjects. "Let's begin," she said, tapping her papers on the podium. "We have a number of repeat violations to address tonight. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, if you'd please stand." The murmurs began instantly. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a current. Mark rose slowly, clutching a manila folder stuffed with evidence. Carol smiled sweetly, but her eyes glimmered with hostility. "Your property continues to fall out of compliance with our community standards," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've issued several warnings, and unfortunately, we may be forced to pursue legal action." Gasps and soft oh-nos fluttered through the crowd. Mark's voice cut through the noise. "Funny, you want to talk about legal action? Let's talk about harassment." Carol blinked. "Excuse me?" Mark opened his folder, pulling out a photograph. He held it up high for the entire room to see. It was a still image from their security camera. Carol, caught in the act of tipping over their trash can. The room fell silent. "I installed cameras because my family was being targeted," Mark continued. "This is your HOA president vandalizing our property." A low rumble of whispers filled the room. Carol's face flushed red. "That photo proves nothing," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "Oh, I'm not done," Mark said. He handed Emily a remote, and she tapped play on a small projector they'd brought. The screen flickered to life, showing video footage, Carol prowling around their yard in the early hours of the morning, taking pictures, peering over fences. The gasps grew louder. That's trespassing, someone muttered. Sure looks like stalking, another voice whispered. Carol tried to maintain composure, but her mask was cracking. This is a gross violation of what? My right to protect my family? Mark's voice thundered now. You've been fining us for rules that don't even exist, threatening foreclosure over trash cans and flower pots. And now, thanks to these cameras, the whole neighborhood gets to see who's really breaking the law. The room erupted into chaos. Homeowners began shouting over one another. Some demanded Carol step down. Others muttered about their own unfair fines, their own letters. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and all the resentment Carol had built over the years came pouring out. Enough, Carol shouted, slamming her hand on the podium. But her authority was crumbling. The calm, collected image she'd cultivated for years was gone. Mark seized the moment. I also took the liberty of forwarding this evidence to the county clerk and local police. Harassment, vandalism, trespassing, you name it. And I've already spoken with an attorney who says the HOA's bylaws won't protect you. Carol's mouth opened, but no words came out. See, Carol, Mark said, stepping closer, his voice low and steady. You thought you had power because you could fine people and send nasty letters. But power only lasts as long as people believe in it. And from where I'm standing, no one here believes in you anymore. The crowd roared in agreement. A few neighbors stood and began chanting, "Vote her out! Vote her out!" Carol's face turned a deep shade of red as she fumbled with her papers, trying to regain control. But the momentum had shifted. The HOA board members, who had sat silently through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. One of them, an older man with gray hair and a trembling voice, cleared his throat. I think we need an immediate vote of confidence in our leadership." The cheers were deafening. Carol tried to object, but no one was listening anymore. The vote happened right there in front of everyone. One by one, hands went up. Homeowner after homeowner voted against her. By the end, the count was overwhelming. Carol was removed as HOA president. The once dominant woman who had terrorized her neighbors was now pale and shaking. She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. But the battle wasn't over. Mark stepped up to the podium, his hands still shaking with adrenaline. This isn't just about us. This is about how we've all been living in fear of a system that was supposed to protect us. That ends tonight. The room erupted into applause. For the first time in months, Mark and Emily felt a flicker of hope. But deep down, they knew Carol wouldn't go quietly. Someone like her never did. Later that night, as they walked back to their car, Mark noticed a car parked at the far end of the lot, its headlights off. Emily gripped his hand tightly. "She's not done," Emily whispered. Mark stared at the car, a chill running down his spine. "No," he said softly, "but neither are we." The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive struck by a stone. News of Carol's downfall spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down now whispered in driveways and over fences, emboldened by what they'd seen the night before. For years, Carol had ruled with a smile and an iron fist, hiding behind bylaws no one fully understood. But last night, she'd been exposed, not just as a bully, but as someone willing to stalk and intimidate her own neighbors to maintain power. For the Thompsons, that morning felt like breathing clean air after a long time underwater. The HOA board had voted unanimously to revoke every single fine issued against them. The stack of letters that had once felt like a death sentence now meant nothing. Their violations were erased, their record wiped clean. But more than that, something deeper shifted. The fear that had loomed over their family for months was finally broken. Still, victory came with complications. Carol hadn't been seen since storming out of the meeting, but word spread that she'd lawyered up. There were rumors she was planning to sue the HOA for wrongful termination, even threatening to take some neighbors to court for defamation. But for the first time in months, Mark wasn't worried. They had evidence, they had witnesses, and more importantly, they had each other. Emily, once so timid and afraid of drawing attention, became the family's unexpected advocate. She spoke out at the next HOA meeting, standing tall as she reminded everyone that communities should feel like home, not a prison. She encouraged neighbors to speak up about their own experiences, and one by one they did. A retired couple revealed they'd paid over $1,200 in bogus fines after Carol claimed their hedge violated height regulations. Another neighbor admitted she'd been too scared to put a swing set in her yard because Carol had threatened her with legal action. Even the most rule-abiding residents began to question the system they'd blindly trusted for years, and so change began. The HOA board called for a full audit of every fine and violation issued over the last 3 years. What they found was staggering. Hundreds of dollars in fabricated penalties, rules that had never been approved by the community, and a disturbing pattern of targeting certain families. Carol hadn't just been strict. She'd weaponized the HOA against anyone who didn't bend to her will. Once the truth was undeniable, the board took drastic action. They overhauled the bylaws, removing vague interpretation clauses that gave Carol unchecked power. They introduced a transparent voting system for all community changes, so no single person could enforce arbitrary rules ever again. And they created a formal grievance process, ensuring no neighbor could be fined or threatened without solid proof of an actual unusual violation. For the first time in years, homeowners felt safe. Front yards bloomed with colorful flowers, porch swings creaked in the breeze, and holiday decorations returned in full force. The Thompsons' house, once under constant scrutiny, became a symbol of quiet resistance. People walked by and smiled, sometimes stopping to thank them for standing up when no one else dared. But not everything returned to normal overnight. Even as the HOA restructured, Carol's shadow lingered. She eventually sold her house, unable to face the whispers and the shame of losing her throne. She left behind an eerie silence, a reminder of how much power one person could hold in a neighborhood built on fear. Some neighbors admitted they'd gone along with her out of self-preservation, a sobering truth that Mark and Emily couldn't ignore. Still, the community slowly stitched itself back together. And the Thompsons, they weren't the same people they'd been before this fight. Mark, who once hated confrontation, found himself volunteering for the HOA.